I am tired after, well, for us right now recording, it's last night. I think I might even drop this a little bit sooner because the World Series will get away from us if we wait too long to talk about it. But my goodness, we apparently witnessed history on a random Monday night here in October. So I assume you watched all the way through, even though we weren't texting each other for this particular game the whole way.
I tapped out at inning 14 of
Game 3.
I've been feeling just a little under the weather. I figured it was about a coin toss. Actually, I did not think it was about a coin toss because for anyone was not familiar or not watching that crazy 18-inning game, the Blue Jays had to pinch run their best hitters, and one of their hitters was injured. And so it became clear to me that what was probably going to happen is one of the Dodgers was going to hit a home run in the bottom of the extra innings to have a walk-off, which is what happened. And so, I figured if that was the case, I would be happy to miss that. And if not, it'd be a nice surprise in the morning. And I unfortunately was correct.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, because there was no score for what amounted to being a whole additional baseball game's worth of baseball, I can definitely understand that tapping out is a good strategy there. It's probably the optimal strategy, you could say. But that being said, it was still quite something to witness. I know my friend and client, Corey Weeds, was watching down at Frankie's with some people. So
nice.
That would have been a crazy time, too. That would have been a stressful time, to be honest. But, it was historic.
It was historic and it was very stressful. I was happy to be stressed in the comfort of my own home and not out and about. And thankfully not in Toronto, where I'm sure most of the Blue Jays fans were watching from, where the game ended at 2:30 a.m.
Yeah, really, we got nothing to complain about here on Pacific time, do we?
No, not really. I was getting sleepy at 10:30, but the game was over by all said and done by 11:30 here. Not so bad.
Well, we know for sure that Game 4 is going to be in the books before this airs, whereas we're talking during Game 4. So with whatever the score is right now, whatever else you're bringing to the table, do you have a Game 4 prediction, or are you going to tap out on that?
I don't want to be too pessimistic. I think the Dodgers are really good. Game 4, Shohei Ohtani is the starting pitcher. I would be surprised if the Jays can win this one, but the Jays have been surprising all season, all postseason. So I'm surprised the Jays made it 18 innings against the Dodgers last night. So no real prediction. I'm hoping to be surprised.
That's a good way to deal with it, I would say. I think that is very fair, and it's good when you're taping a podcast for later to have that approach. So right on.
Yeah, I'm not going to confidently be wrong on the internet for everyone to see.
We didn't make that our brand in particular on this show, maybe in the future, but not on this show. We don't have to do that.
Next year we'll be baseball pundits, and then we'll be loudly making proclamations and having to correct ourselves on x.com.
I'll continue my brand of just being a pointless contrarian, and I'll start next season as a Mariners fan. Yeah, it'll be great.
Yeah, exactly. I could be a Mariners fan next year. I mean, as well as a Blue Jays fan. Mariners are great.
Yeah, because usually that's not going to be a huge all the time conflict, I guess. Yeah, I mean, they're in the same league, so I guess there's that thing. It's in football, you can pick an AFC team and an NFC team, and it's not going to be a big issue. In baseball, you could do the same for both leagues, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we hope that when you're watching this, the Blue Jays have won the World Series, but
that would be lovely.
Odds are not in their favor yet.
So what have we got for today now that we have rounded the sports corner, my friend?
So for our kind of meat and potatoes of this episode, we have a bit of a thorny one, but I think it's relevant to a lot of the things we talk about, being technology, in this case specifically AI and art. And I listened to a podcast that I really love called Never Post, which I recommend to anyone listening to this. Fair amount of overlap on the things we talk about. It's a podcast about the internet. And they had a segment on AI and what they're calling new American fascism. And before anyone kind of gets their hackles up to say well, who's to say what, if what we're experiencing now is fascism, the segment kind of dispenses with that argument quite early. It's I think Mike Rugnetta, the host of the show, and the kind of journalist on the segment said it's sufficient to say that some people in the United States are living through some, pretty intense and horrific circumstances that we can, for the purposes of like the argument or the question that the segment poses, we can say is like fascism, right? They're talking about immigration raids, the National Guard invading cities, this type of thing. Pretty rough circumstances. And the question the segment poses is, has generative AI art become the aesthetic of new American fascism? And I think he's using the new American fascism term to kind of talk about generally the state of affairs there with ICE and the DHS. And so it's certainly a provocative question. He's responding, I think, to a few different think pieces that came out prior to this, where people kind of draw lines between, these big tech companies and the Trump administration, the, prevalence of AI art on ICE's recruitment x.com account, where they've got what you might call slopaganda or Agitslop, kind of AI artwork designed
Great words, I gotta say. Just way better than enshitification, I gotta say.
Agitslop really got me. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think when I, read the question, my instinct was like, yeah, I can certainly see why you're asking. It bears asking. And I guess for starters, what are your initial reactions to hearing the question as it comes up? You listen to the segment, right?
Yeah, I listened to the episode. I'm not an every episode listener, but I think it's an interesting podcast for us to keep tabs on because, as any podcast that bills itself as one about the internet would agree, it comes from the reply all tree. Yeah. This is the most influential podcast about the internet, so to speak, and so do we to some extent, several branches further down the tree. In terms of some of the people we've followed and appreciated, there are other shows today that have not fallen far from that tree, like PJ Vote's search engine, he being one of the founders of Reply All. This is like a coaching tree of podcasts. This is an area that is very dear to us in terms of our influences when we talk about these kind of subjects. So it's a great show in that area. Now, I do disagree with the premise, but I think we can still have this discussion, even though I disagree with the premise, because I still think it's an interesting discussion, regardless of what extent you think that what is currently going on is going to be best described as fascism. I think whatever you want to call it, I think it's an interesting discussion whether or not AI is the house style of this thing and what that says about them and what it says about the people who oppose them, who seem to really want to embrace AI being the house style of them. I think that's an interesting discussion. I don't think you have to say what's happening right now is fascism or not for it to be an interesting discussion.
Totally. And Mike actually ends up there, not to spoil the whole segment, but he kind of does say I don't think it's worthwhile to call what's happening in the US right now fascism, basically for kind of any reasons you might say, which is the United States is a very big, very diverse country, and there's some pretty horrific things going on, but there's still freedom of expression, in as much as it might not be complete freedom of expression for everyone throughout the whole country, but there's still it would take a lot more for the U.S. to descend into something we could, call fascism. But yes, the point being that it doesn't really matter for the sake of the discussion. So the piece kind of goes through a few different directions as he kind of explores the question. Right, we can kind of look at the DHS's use of AI tools to generate, recruitment images, and some of those kind of evoke a pretty stark authoritarian worldview. Right, he talks about recruitment posters talking about protect your homeland. This stuff really does kind of echo 30s kind of nasty stuff that you might have seen in Spain or Germany. And you could look at that and say, like, see, they're using this for their purposes. So AI art is kind of this, like, has this fascistic tone to it. And I think he's correct to say, like, well, that's just basically guilt by association, right? There's like nothing that doesn't mean that the tool is inherently fascistic. And in fact, to argue that AI art is this new aesthetic of this new political moment, kind of is wrong to say, because there is no coherent aesthetic, right? Like, that's part of the problem with AI tools and AI art, is it's this just stew of all the aesthetics that came before it.
Yeah. I have a couple of things to jump in on. One is that I think that in particular that you just said is one of the reasons why it's pretty likely that if you look back on this in several years that you would say, oh, he was right. I think it's because what AI art looks like right now is so much based on the capabilities of the models, the rate of change of the capabilities of the models, what the current models offer right now. And they do have their own house style at the moment. And as their capabilities increase rapidly, this house style is also likely to change very rapidly. But it just so happens that if you look back on the years 2024, 2025, 2026 and onward, probably pretty likely that it will have this house style, the AI content of the world. And that in a future period of time, one that is not the period overlapping with the current US administration, that the house style will be different.
Yeah.
And so there is something tautological about looking at this AI house style of the moment. It just happens to be happening in the year 2025. And so it's pretty likely that in the future, we'll be able to look back on it and say, oh, this reminds me of them. For that reason alone.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and it's this, like you say, kind of too nebulous at the moment to pin down as a coherent style or a coherent aesthetic, and instead, to wonder if those. It makes me think of the Brian Eno thing, which is that, like, all. What's he say about imperfections? Basically, like, all imperfections will eventually become aesthetics. He's talking about music in this case, about like the crackle of vinyl or tape hiss, that any kind of technology and the art technology and the imperfections that come with it, eventually we reflect on as an aesthetic that is either one to be imitated, like down the road you might have to be like, searching for like 2024 Ghibli frame OpenAI art, which is its own thing because it doesn't really look like the Ghibli stuff, and it doesn't, whatever comes next might be better or worse or different. But like one day that might be a desirable aesthetic for, I don't know, the children of Gen Alpha to make their profile pics.
You know what it's going to be? Yeah. So bands are going to get photo shoots done. There's going to be bands in the 2030s. There still will be. Bands are not dead. They're going to get photo shoots, and they're going to tell the photographer, we really want this to look like the Velvet Sundowns profile photo in 2025.
That is really dark to think about. So that's kind of the first direction that Mike explores in the piece. Is this because this administration is heavily using it, and some of the administration's allies seem to really like this stuff? Does that kind of mean that this is the aesthetic of this current political period? Yeah, and the answer is like, no, it's not really saying anything about the art form and or the technology, to just the guilt by association point. Where it gets kind of a little more interesting is he talks a little more about this theorist Walter Benjamin, who was alive during the Second World War and died before being deported from Spain. He was a German Jewish kind of critical theorist. And Walter Benjamin wrote about kind of fascism and art in a piece called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. And Benjamin had a couple kind of interesting directions he took, and some of them apply to now and some of them don't. The the first kind of direction that might apply to our current age is this idea of that Benjamin coins called aura, which not like not like
We're
Zoomers.
not aura farming
We're
here, not aura as in farming.
Although it's kind of the same. It is kind
Maybe
of the
it is
same,
kind of the same.
in context. Benjamin kind of posits that what makes art important and gives it significance and gives it kind of weight is that it, is a physical thing that had a life, went through something, through an artist making it, and now there's an original, and that gives it aura, that its life and its physical presence in the world gives it aura. And he kind of talks about how, the absence of aura, because obviously fascism would be wholly unconcerned with aura. It would be mostly interested in the mass production of whatever it could do. And that seems tempting to make that comparison, but you realize quite quickly that that comparison, you would also be throwing out several other important artistic babies with the bathwater by saying like that all digital art, right? Any podcast, any ebook, any digital file, things that are infinitely reproducible by Benjamin's definition would also not have aura. And I think in 2025, we've kind of moved past that, right? I can make music on my computer that doesn't meaningfully occupy any physical space. The ones and zeros haven't gone through anything that give them any additional heft. We wouldn't necessarily say that means it's my Ableton art isn't fascistic necessarily. I hope not. Get in the comments if you think I'm making really bad fascistic art.
So hold on a second. Is this the same distinction that the jazz memes guy was trying to make in Jazz Memes versus Patrick Bartley when he was like, there's no art in AI, and like AI by definition is not about art making because you're trying to do something different. It's the same thing as like how propaganda and mass media is like not art either because it's not concerned with like coming back to the intangible aura of the thing, of the source itself, how it just churns stuff out. Is that the same kind of distinction?
I think it's a related or downstream distinction. I think like Benjamin was really concerned with like the physical presence of something, of a painting or of a I think he was actually really talking about like film and the reproducibility of photographs. Like he was saying that, disseminating propaganda posters, these things lack, aura, and fascists love that because they can just infinitely reproduce things. I think, post the Campbell's Soup pop art stuff, I think we've kind of dispensed with this idea that reproducibility, kills a piece of art's aura.
So the Campbell Soup Warhol thing is almost like a reclamation of mass production as art, like trying to find some value in it. Yeah,
I certainly think that was part of Warhol's thing, was he was dealing with mass production, and that his art was mass produced, right? Like that was part of it, is that he would be making these pieces en masse. And so, yes, I absolutely think there's a tie in there. So we're now thoroughly in some theoretical weeds here, but that's all to say that you can't say that like, okay, AI art is like fundamentally bad, capital B bad, because it's infinitely reproducible. Most, I would say, of the art we look at and consume in the day-to-day is infinitely reproducible. And I don't, most current humans wouldn't say that that's, killing it, or it's necessarily awful. So I thought that was an interesting kind of, not takedown, interesting rebuttal of that idea. The other direction it goes is that, okay, maybe if it's not inherently this auraless, reproducible thing isn't making it fascistic. Maybe it's fascistic because of how AI art, or AI in general, serves to aid fascism. So that like, this also gets kind of heady and theoretical with the idea that like in the fascist state, fascism this is a quote from the piece, that fascism seeks to give the masses expression, but nothing else. That really in a hard authoritarian state, the members don't have any real agency, but they are given some power of expression. And, 30s Germany, you could go to these rallies and feel powerful, express some powerful views, and have no real freedom to kind of do as you please, but you're given these tools of expression. And so does it have this almost like opiate of the masses ability that you can like sit in ChatGPT and infinitely make these like bad little Ghibli drawings or...
and thereby the implication is that you're not given the liberty to create or find what you were calling aura. It's like
Sure.
like there's a famine on the aura farm.
Yeah.
that is being caused by this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, if you want to hang on to the aura idea, yeah, exactly. That would kind of be it. Like if some digital art can have aura, it's that you're given this expressive tool that is so limited by everything before it, right? ChatGPT or even Sora or any of these AI art tools purport to give you this infinite landscape you can choose to make anything you want, but you can't make anything you want because it's so narrowly limited by its training data, right? It's not creative. It's a mass consumption tool, which I think is interesting. I think, admittedly, that now we're quite far away from saying, like, does this make it a fascistic tool? I think it makes it bad art. Or you could say it's not art at all, but I think we're like quite far from the argument.
I just want to contextualize where we are in October 2025 as well, and how it is actually kind of relevant to this discussion, because the actual AI tech news of the last couple weeks happens to be, things that we haven't discussed yet on this show. They happen to be these new apps like OpenAI Sora and Meta Vibes as an attempt. And you can definitely look at the launches of these AI gen video feed consumer apps and think about this, and it's very relevant.
Yeah, the infinite slop thing, and this feeling that that these tools can give the creators that they are powerful, that they are creative, but really again they're incredibly confining as tools versus an open canvas, which could include a tablet on an iPad and a pen that you could really draw anything, or a blank, new Ableton session, right? Like that you can see how if things were to get much worse in the world, that these tools might be used to placate people and be like, you can do whatever you want, but you can't do whatever you want. That's not what these tools do.
And if like me, you were not necessarily keen to say that we're in fascism right now, okay, imagine the platonic ideal of the fascist. If they get their hands on the models today in a world where more and more people are using OpenAI, Sora, and Meta Vibes, will it be to that hypothetical platonic fascist's benefit? I think I would probably say yeah. So that's why it's like, for me, it's still interesting to have the conversation, even if you disagree with the premise IRL, because there are a lot of features of spending too much time in this kind of world that would lend themselves to that kind of environment. On the other hand, you could say like, oh, well, is radio a fascist technology? Because radio was such a big enabler of World War II era, military, fascist government, national culture.
Yeah.
And it's remembered that way because of where it was in the timeline of radio. And we're at an early spot in the timeline of AI. So, I mean, if AI continues to have a long shelf life out in the world, yeah, maybe you'll look back as like early AI and this kind of stuff was relevant to it. But you may not remember AI that way, because if you look at radio, you remember it for all kinds of other things other than that. You don't say that radio is a fascist technology, so maybe you won't say that AI is a fascist technology. However, you can think about if somebody took the controls, or if you think the person at the controls right now is a fascist, it's like you can imagine that this is a favorable environment for them. I totally buy that. Yeah.
It's interesting, the radio comparison, and we'll get to another one that Benjamin wrote about. because you can imagine, so radio, you can almost, if we were to think in internet terms, radio is closer to a protocol, right? It would be very difficult for one state actor to control radio, right? It's a technology you can use to like send wavelengths over the air. And yeah, you can like track down people who are broadcasting things that you don't like and shut that down. But like the state couldn't just own radio, right? There'd be other countries that have radio, this time. But the state could certainly own or co-opt private companies with very large language models that are very powerful, right? That's like certainly a risk, I think. Not necessarily like imminent, but part of this piece does talk about the like, active collaboration between maybe like Elon Musk's XAI and OpenAI's got government contracts as well.
Okay, I'll put this to you straight up. If the U.S. government nationalizes OpenAI, like in full-on AI 2027 scenario mode, is that fascism?
It depends on so many other factors. I would say that's not great. I mean, yeah, nationalizing a private company like that has so much power would certainly look like fascism. I mean, absent any other factors to say otherwise.
Because I would say, yeah, probably.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's like, unlike the radio, these are like private models that can be changed. And, this is not a protocol. It's a specific technology that's being used. And it's like owned and not, it's not open source, not even close, right? Mostly anyone outside these companies does not understand how they work. And the companies don't really understand how the other works beyond just like some talent sharing. And to take, the radio thing, like we're saying, is we now look back and like radio is great. We have like Garrison Keillor and Stuart McLean, and these guys are the furthest thing from fascists. This is a good technology, right? We all love the radio. Benjamin, at the time, actually, in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, that's a mouthful of a piece. He was writing about film, actually, because film was a new technology at the time. And Benjamin, I think at the time, was like, hey, this has been co-opted by fascists. He was sort of having an alarmist reaction to it because it was used again for propaganda. There was a bunch of like German filmmaking that was happening. And probably at the time, it was like, okay, this is used by the bad guys. And this technology is like going to be a bad technology because the bad guys have taken it over. And I think, in hindsight, not necessarily, right? Film did not, thankfully, become just like a tool for fascist propaganda. It got used by all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons. It's just another technology. And so, the Never Post segment kind of makes that comparison in that case, right? Like just because where we're at right now with AI art and its associations with some unsavory political situations does not necessarily mean that this is it. To which I, would wonder, like, can we imagine some alternative case, right? Like, of course, you and I talked at length about like this AI art stuff is like bad and tacky and like no one likes it and we should just ignore it and hope it goes away. But like, what's the film equivalent version of this? Like in 30 years when we like look back that there's some broader use of this tooling that isn't just the bad guys or the people who don't care about artists and are trying to replace them. Like, can you think of an alternative case?
I want to try and set this up with two of the examples of the bad cases, because what I've been thinking about this whole time is like, I can think of two kind of personas that have like a fear version of fascism in mind that is part of their persona. Like the kind of hacker persona.
Sure.
If you're a hacker, what you're afraid fascism is this world where everything is proprietary.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed to do open source and you're not allowed to jailbreak anything. Everything is proprietary and everything is out to kind of steal your attention, time, or money in service of a business model that you don't have any stake in. I think if you're a hacker, that's like your worst fear. as it would be represented in fascism.
Sure.
I don't really come from like hacker cloth necessarily, but I've spent time around and I kind of understand
Yeah.
the worldview. I would say like philosophically I'm like a free marketeer, and I think if you're a free marketeer, you also have a fear monster of fascism. It's like corporation and government total merger, which is why I threw that thing out about OpenAI and the government, because that's what I'm afraid of. And you think about that and you're like, oh boy, we're kind of headed into a world where everything's becoming more proprietary, and the U.S. corporations and the U.S. government are merging in some ways around this very technology. So that's almost that's my radicalization of like, oh, I'm kind of coming around to believing this in some way. But I think if you look through both of those personas and maybe some other ones that, like maybe crudely, like you're like the hacker and I'm the free marketeer, basically. And so we both would those would be our fascism fear monsters. It's like, if you think of those, you can think about how you would run away from it, which is, I think the reason why I would say today we are not under fascism is because we are, Silicon Valley has been a pretty free market in some senses. VC has been an innovation in financial markets. It's not like totally free. Like there's a lot of government subsidies that went into creating the internet, and there's a lot of coordination in the VC world, but that was like an innovation in a market that became globally relevant, and that continues to power this like AI boom in the markets. And it's the reason why the sector is growing so fast, is because these companies that came out of that era are in charge. But if they totally merge with the government, then we've got some issues here. And they also came out of a world where there were a lot of open source projects, and to the extent they make everything more proprietary, that's also a challenge. So on those two things, you can think about it. You can be like, well, what's going on in terms of open source AI stuff versus non? Where's that going to go? How likely is it that there's any chance that there's going to be open projects that succeed? Maybe some companies are backing open projects with sinister intentions. And then on the tightness between the companies and the government, what rules are there in place, and how likely is it that the rules are even going to be followed anyway?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I like the kind of the two potential negative cases. You mentioning open source, I think, brings me to like maybe the positive case, if I'm gonna like steel man that like there's a chance this technology is salvageable for something not totally evil. And we've talked about Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst a few times in passing. They probably again deserve a whole segment based on like various things that they've worked on. Holly Herndon is a musician and technologist. Matt Dryhurst as well, I think more on the visual arts and technology space, and music as well. They are partners and collaborators. And Holly was very early to some types of generative AI, as far as like training a model on a set of data and getting that model to generate output. Holly had an album called Proto in like the late 2010s. This is before LLMs were everywhere. This was like a research project where she trained an AI on what we would understand of as an LLM AI on like choral recordings. And it was very crude. It's called Spawn, the tool that she ended up making. It did not sound really like people. It sounded really interesting because it was quite bad and rudimentary. And Holly's kind of continued on making stuff like that. And her focus has been on proprietary models. She's got a model that like generates images of herself. I think she had an art show in London recently, where it's like lots of basically AI generated models of herself, but it's her model trained on her stuff, right? So it's a consent-based model. It's not scraped, hasn't scraped the entire internet. And so I think she's kind of been an advocate for like, this is interesting stuff. Like there's like cool things you can do here with that don't involve stealing from people, that don't involve ripping people off, that don't involve making tacky hack, Ghibli artwork. I hate that's not always my
So
example.
that's the Web 1.0 hacker persona philosophy, really.
Yeah.
It's a new version of that.
Totally. And lots of her work has been with that. So I think if there is any sort of glimmer of hope of things like that happening, of this technology not being completely going the directive like proprietary, and then wherever the proprietary stuff takes us, right? Like eventually, these companies are going to figure out how to make money, try to figure out how to make money, or not, or they'll just collapse. But I imagine in their money-making directions they're going to try to go, it's going to get pretty ugly. As far as, we've seen already the harms of people who are overusing ChatGPT, and OpenAI is now, their incentives are shifting from like a for good nonprofit organization to they're trying to become a for-profit organization. And so I think we can say this might not go great.
Yeah. I'm more pessimistic now than when we started.
Oh no!
I think about the premise of the question. I have a few other random things, as many as I can remember, I guess, that occurred to me that I could kind of run down here to round it out. You're right. I'm stuck on Aura. That's one of my big takeaways here. And I went to go grab this object.
That's got some aura.
We were at this album release. This has aura because it's physically. I said intangible earlier, but it's actually about a tangible aura.
Yeah.
Right. That something has, and I think, music folks, we all intuit that this has more aura because it is a CD than if it was just digital only. Like that just intuitively makes sense to us in some way. If it's somebody's independent project, that it kind of means more, that there's a little bit more intent behind a certain aspect of it when you go and you make a physical version.
Yeah.
It gives you more freedom to unlock the aura of the thing, right?
It might even, again, we might be stretching Benjamin's definition of aura here, but I think it's useful still. It probably even has arguably more aura on the sliding scale because that was a physical object that was created by virtue of you and two friends and an engineer in a room this winter for a couple days, right? Like this is not, you weren't recording into laptops on your own. This is like a physical thing that has manifested from like connection and human meaning making together.
Yeah, and this Write and Trained by Madeline Elkins trio, we played a show too where we shared this music with a group of people specifically. That it was the culmination of earlier this is like the story of a year's time in some of our lives here, so that's why it feels cool. That's why my own two previous albums feel cool. That's why the Early Spirit album feels cool to me, because it ends up standing for something that way in a way that can't be recreated. So, being in the music world is full of examples of, even if it's stretching the definition of like what you're missing the further we slide into the world where there's more and more AI stuff. We talk about that all the time, but like the opportunity still exists for you to go and make the physical thing, whether that's pressing a large number of CDs and vinyl, but also just like little knick-knack versions of it if you want, if you don't have the money. Like you can write kind of personalized notes to people, or you can make you can send people like postcards from your tour or whatever if they've supported you, or there's all kinds of little trades you can make to give people something tangible that are things that we always try and find reasons to talk about, because that's what we find we want to be doing when we're out here. Yeah, that's part of this. We're trying to find the meaning that we don't want to be erased here. So there's certainly that's a recurring topic. Okay, another thing. Have you ever heard of or seen? This is one of my favorite YouTube video essays ever, probably, called "Why YouTubers Hold Microphones Now" by Tom Nicholas.
I don't think I've seen it. Okay.
So I'm gonna say the premise of this video essay to you, and let me know if you catch immediately why I'm putting this into this conversation. Okay. So in a nutshell, the premise of this video essay is that the right-wing YouTube channel PragerU had a house production style that the rest of the political creator economy wanted to antagonize so badly and differentiate themselves from, that organically a trend that persists to this day of creators, especially younger ones, holding microphones while they're talking instead of using mic stands or arms like we are, but especially instead of using clip-on mics.
The clip-on is the PragerU
and that
thing,
a different creator political socio-economy was able to establish their own house style because a particularly rancid to them example of a different house style emerged that they could put themselves in opposition to.
Interesting. I mean, you and I have talked about this. This is like a much more innocent example even than PragerU, of like Vancouver might have this thriving creative music or quote unquote free jazz scene because for so long and for a period of time, there's like a dominant straight ahead scene. Cellar Records for a while was very, very straight ahead, and it was the dominant kind of musical force in the scene in the city. And there was a group of people that were like, I don't play like that. I'm not that interested. And like they found their people who were like, actually, we can stand in opposition. And now we have two thriving scenes of people who do that. This is not to say that the straight ahead people are fascists. And this is
no. I'll work. That's really funny. I'll work around it too, because I will say that Cellar is also a reaction to how experimental the festival was and how coastal jazz was.
Totally. And I'm sure you can chicken and egg, right? Like, is the free scene now reaction to Cellar, or is it really the free scene is like the old guard and were they could go in circles. But I think that's totally right, and I think that's maybe a great conclusion to draw on is like, as we talk about it's a bummer conversation, right? We're like talking about this technology that's like really pervasive and kind of everywhere and hard to avoid. And, really makes you think about the state of the world and the state of the political situation, especially in the US. And what we can do as artists is, to like set ourselves apart. And I think that's what we've been saying this whole time as we've been talking about AI art. It's like the only thing to do is just like keep making good stuff because that will win, right? Like there's this oralist stuff doesn't have sticking power.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I want to inject that particular video essay, I think, is because, yes, conclusion number one, I'm putting it together, and I can see how like hackers and free marketeers, kind of fascist monsters, are, have a potential to come true here more than in a while because of the ground conditions. Conclusion number two, I think. It's just the time, it's just the years on the calendar and where the models are at right now and how AI art has emerged now and what's happening right now. Well, okay, we're going to associate it with that just like we associate the mullets and hair metal with the 80s. It's just time. And then argument number three that I wanted to chip in was I think there are people now who really want to say that AI is the house style of this current administration because it's very politically useful for them to say that because it's a very legible opponent and it's a bugaboo, and they sense that it's unpopular, and in many ways they're right, and so they want to tag them with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good it is a useful kind of us versus them, and if the them is crappy AI art, which again no one asked for, no one likes, no one's looking at even the Agitslop stuff really on x.com and saying like, really love this. Maybe some people are, but that's an extreme minority, really. People say that and think it's tacky and bad, and that does not want to make them work for ICE any more than they did before they saw the post. So
yeah. At the same time, though, I mean, people's signaling against the use of AI is the same kind of thing as like holding your microphone instead of using a lav.
Totally. Yeah. It just sets you apart from the other. Interesting.
Yeah, that was a cool exploration of that. It's a good episode too. The source material, we didn't stick too close to it, but we used it as a jumping point for all kinds of other views we had of it, which is fun.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend anyone check out Never Post. It's not all heavy political stuff. They had a good episode on Etsy witches, which is relevant if you know anything about the Mariners. An Etsy witch, I believe, blessed Cal Raleigh at one point.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad you took it there instead. I think there's also heavy political
Okay, there
connotations
is
to them
actually
as
a heavy
well.
political thing with Etsy witches as well, but that's not where I was going with it. There is all sorts of stuff you can check out on that podcast if you're interested.
Yeah. I've got a quick Canadian music story if you want to hit it in this
Please,
one.
yeah.
Okay, so we have a federal budget that's coming out, which means that there's like a new federal fiscal year in Canada that comes eventually. That actually changes over in March, but we're having an early budget for some reason that we will find out next week
Oh
on
boy.
November 4th that they've decided to change when they're presenting the budget. And, that's a little concerning because it means they're probably afraid of what it's going to show. But that's not exactly what I wanted to chat about. In particular, I saw some activism around the Canada Music Fund and a chunk of money that is used by the Canada Music Fund expiring at the end of the current Canadian fiscal year. Now, the Canada Music Fund right now is basically the government body that powers Factor, the grant funding organization, and the francophone equivalent, which is called Musique Action.
Okay.
So Factor and Musique Action are funded by the Canada Music Fund, which is like a Department of Canadian Heritage federal budget entity.
Okay.
So apparently it was framed by several kind of provincial music organizations like Manitoba Music and Music Ontario that $16 million of annual funding is about to expire. And there is a letter in particular that I'll link in the description. There's like a page and a template letter that they want people to send out as part of this activism. And some of the things that the letter says are, quote, "This investment is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year with no future investment in sight," end quote, in the Canadian Music Fund. And then also they call it a, quote, $16 million loss. And that's per year. And the reason why they're talking about 16 million is because in 2024, the Canada Music Fund received a top up, like a boost in its annual funds available of 16 million per year, committed for 2 years.
Okay.
So the 24-25 fiscal year and the 25-26 fiscal years. The total budget of the Canada Music Fund was increased by 16 million. And I was like, well, okay, how big is the actual Canada Music Fund annual budget? And so I could kind of look back through the 2010s. There's some government pages that talk about what the fund has done over those years.
Yeah.
And I'll link to one of them in particular where I learned a bit about it. And I saw that during the 2010s, the Canada Music Fund typically sits at around 25 million per year.
Okay.
But the government had started to boost it around 2019 by adding like, oh, here's an additional 10 million of funds for this year, so that Factor and Musique Action had more money to deliver in their programming. And so this 16 million thing is another top up to that.
Got it.
And I found a piece by my friend Heather Kitching, who has the website rootsmusic.ca, Roots Music Canada, where she wrote about it. And she said, quote, "The Liberals promised in 2021, the federal Liberals, Justin Trudeau's Liberals, to increase the pot of money to around, or the Liberals promised in 2021 to increase the pot of money to around $50 million per year this year.
Wow.
But industry organizations across Canada had been aggressively lobbying to make it 60 million.
Okay.
So we're talking like this activism is interesting to me because I'm noticing a lot in this kind of 5 years out from COVID era. There's a lot of big top ups and big boosts that went into various grant programs. And appropriately, in my opinion, they were framed as temporary.
Right. But now when they're expiring, we've gotten used to the extra funding.
Exactly. Yeah. So when they're expiring, people want to keep the bar up there. And how feasible is that going to be?
Interesting. I mean, this kind of goes, we talked a little bit about some other arts funding things, which are experiencing the same issue. And I think as well, right, like the economic situation in those 4 years of the 2021 to now has changed, right? Like inflation's been quite bad. And so like, who knows if that, additional 10 million is like appropriate or not. I think it is another case, though, of people getting a temporary boost and then just building it into their calculations of like how much money is always going to be there.
And that's why, in that vein, the letter, its call to action at the end, the template letter, is to, quote, permanently increase funding for the Canada Music Fund to $60 million at the earliest possible opportunity and no later than spring 2026. So under the framing of this budget is going to cut away at the Canada Music Fund, we want to take the opportunity now to set the bar way up here where we've been asking for it to be.
And we don't know how bad this cut's going to be when the new budget comes out, right? Like this could be an actual cut, or is it more likely to just be that flat 25 again?
Well, there could be an actual cut because the current government is saying that a lot of things need to be cut in kind of a way that has been a theme throughout 2025 in the US and Canada. But really, we're just talking about the expiry of this iteration of the top-up, of the $16 million top-up, which will expire at the end of this fiscal year. The budget may or may not say anything else about that. It could offer a new top-up amount. It could offer a cut to the budget or anything else. But it's really about this $60 million per year for 2 years top-up that went in, and that it is slated to expire because it was announced for 2 years.
Very interesting and a little concerning.
Okay, so are you familiar with the idea that people say, oh, now that more people are driving electric cars, there's less gas tax revenue to be collected, and so we have funding shortfalls for various things like roads and infrastructure projects because we're not going to be able to get as much gas tax money on gas sales if people don't need gas.
Interesting. This is something that people say for advocating for like less or more gas tax, or fewer electric vehicles. Like, what's the argument?
So that's a good question. I think this is something that people who want what is called congestion pricing say.
Okay.
Because they're like, and it's the same thing as like, oh, we should have had the transit levy, the 1% ticket levy. It's in this bucket of things. It's like we need to independently fund things. If other stuff is, we might have even literally talked about gas taxes and electric cars when we did the ticket levy thing. But I think people who want like tolls and congestion pricing, or who want to actually fund things directly that way, will say like, oh, potential to get gas tax revenue is going to go down if more people drive electric cars, right? Yeah. Well, let me introduce you to the declining state of Canadian radio.
Oh boy.
Because this letter also says, quote, at the same time, dwindling private radio revenue has decreased the level of support that they provide to the fund recipients, including Factor, Musique Action, and Canadian Star Maker. Any further funding injected into the system by foreign streamers under C11 remains uncertain. We do not expect to see any significant revenues from this in the near future. End quote. So there's two things that they threw in there. One of them is that if you've ever written a Factor grant, your acknowledgement says like supported by Factor, the government of Canada, and Canada's private radio broadcasters.
Is that all?
That's because it's the Canadian Heritage Fund and like a trust fund from the radio industry that funds Factor.
Interesting. I did not know that.
So it's not all government money.
Yeah.
It's like profits from the radio industry that have underwritten Factor over the decades through its existence in Canada.
And unsurprisingly, probably radio is not doing so hot, like all media right now.
Yep. And somebody in the government thought of a new funding stream, which was the C11 that they referenced, the Online Streaming Act, the bill that tries to tax people like Meta and results in them like blocking content in Canada because they don't want to pay this tax. So it's like they've tried to make up for it in this other way, but maybe it's not going to come through for as many dollars as we wanted. So this is part of the reason why they are asking for such a huge boost to the Canada Music Fund, is because one of Factor's traditional side sources of money, or like one of its big components, is not going to be there because radio is declining. And this other attempt to try and collect some revenues, maybe, who knows how much it's actually going to deliver.
Very interesting. As we were discussing this, I realized I think your new calling is, we need you to be Ezra Klein Abundance, but for Canadian music. Oh, no. I need you to start a neo-lib a neolib Canadian music fund or something.
Oh boy, I gotta work on my breathless podcast voice. I gotta be
Yeah.
like, there's a problem in the Canadian radio industry.
There you go. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. You take your free market shenanigans and you say, hey, look, if factory's drying up, we got to make sure, and you just work with these organizations and make them profitable.
Okay, but Carson, why are they winning? Why are they winning?
Pretty good Ezra Klein.
I'm such a good Ezra Klein that I blurred out your camera.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. Oh man, it took me out.
Man. Oh boy, yeah. I mean, it sounds. Who am I to wish that this doesn't come through?
Sure.
Like my clients and us, we'd all benefit if this, if this gets topped up as much as possible. And like honestly, we're talking about what is it if you have in the tens of millions? Is that 8 figures?
Yeah.
8 figures. We're talking about 8 figures of money. Like we're going to talk about a budget where potentially we have a $100 billion deficit.
Right.
Like this is not a hugely material amount of money, and it's money that would flow to us and our friends. So I need to say that at least for sure, because like, well, on one hand, who am I to wish that this doesn't happen? On the other hand, I think that this is flimsy activism, or at least like, just it doesn't really tell you what's going on. It's a little bit of fear mongering. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to look into it for this show when I saw some posts about that, and that's what I walked away from with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm when it comes to, is this unsustainable thing going to keep going, but support artists, our friends, families, etc. Obviously, like I'm on the side of let's do that, and hopefully these organizations find a way to turn a corner and build something sustainable in the future. But like, I think cuts would be bad. Losing this temporary boost would also be a bummer, because I'm sure again it's not this quote unquote loss isn't anticipated, even though it should not be counted as a loss. The extra money should have just been extra. But that's not the reality. So I, hopefully whatever comes is not an enormous hit to arts funding.
Yeah, one of the Manitoba Music links I pulled said that like, the private radio trust fund side of Funding Factor was in the tens, like $10 to $20 million, and now it's like $2 million.
Ooh.
So the whole top up at this point is basically just trying to weigh the scale against that. Yeah. So that kind of shows you what's going on. And I mean, I do agree with this other cause that's close to this one, which is the equitable remuneration concept, like where you want to take the neighboring rights, like where you pay performers for radio streams, not just songwriters, and you want to put that on streaming. I think that's a worthy cause. So I'll end on the agreeable note of like, I think equitable remuneration is worth pursuing. People have all kinds of cockamamie ideas of how to put more money flowing through the system to pay for it, like the 50% streaming tax and Bill C-11, Online Streaming Act, and all those other things. We're trying to figure it out. Like there's been some efforts of that. I like to watch them. I wish them the best.
Hashtag abundance.
And yet, and yet I am showing my true colors. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, great discussions all around. Do you have a recommendation for the folks at home?
Yeah, I don't think I've recommended this one yet, so I will. If you want like an actual radio show listening experience, you want to use that fascistic technology known as radio to listen to something good, you can listen to the NTS radio show of Margot, the influencer, about various kinds of creative music. On her Instagram, she's interviewed Jeff Parker and all kinds of other people like that. So I kind of started following her in the last year or two. She has a weekly radio show on NTS called Self-Soothe with Margot, where it's a 1-hour show, and she pulls very eclectic kind of music. You got everything from straight up jazz to experimental noise to shoegaze to electronics to everything. There's definitely something for everybody in our circles on this show. So I think that's if you want like an actual radio show experience, that's a radio show that I've actually checked out recently. It's on NTS Radio, which unfortunately it was purchased by Universal, or I don't know, purchased, but Universal became like the majority shareholder in NTS recently. So
That's
unfortunately, we are now astroturfing. It's not fully independent online radio, and yet there's still some great shows on it, and that's good. So Margot's show self-sue on NTS.
We win some, we lose some. That's great. I'll have to check that out. My recommendation is an album by a folk artist, Hannah Francis. It's called Nested in Tangles. Hannah Francis wrote an album that I really loved, I want to say 2 years ago, and the name's going to escape me. But this new record is awesome. Has some experimental parts, has some nice noisy bits. Daniel Rosen from the band Grizzly Bear is maybe the most featured kind of guest on there, the most known featured guest. Appears on a couple tracks. It's great. Good folk music, singer-songwriting. I recommend.
Nice. All right, without further ado, this has been episode 2022, episode 22 in 2025. Go Jays. We will know the outcome of the World Series before we pod again, so let's see what happens.
All right, go Jays.